Good morning. This is Pastor Jason of Kona Faith Center with a word for today. And the word for today is faith. Faith. My current definition for faith is trust God, rely on God, obey God. In other words, develop my relationship with God to the point that I don't have to think about it. I know that God is eminently trustworthy. I know that God is always faithful. I know that God only speaks truth. I know that whatever God says, he will do, and he will do. And come to the place in my life where I ask him first, spend time with him, and receive his promises. And then let him do it. Rely on him, not on self, not on others. Our trust is in God. Our reliance must be in God. And our reliance must be that God must be that he will do whatever he promised without our help, or is that really without our interference? Now, obedience is the key. In my concept of this, all of God's promises are conditional, meaning that in every promise God says, if you, then I. And the one thing that always seems to be attached to the if you is obedience. We read Romans 4 today, the great chapter on Abraham being the father of all those who are of faith. The chapter that talks about the steps of faith. The foundation of faith is relationship. Abraham had a relationship with God. He believed what God said because he knew who God was. See, it's that knowing who God is that leads to the believing of God's promises. So without a relationship with God, hey, there's nothing to work with. Because without a promise from God, there's nothing to apply faith to. You can't make it happen, only he can. So let's walk in the steps of faith of Abraham. Let's receive the promise through relationship with God. Let's receive the grace necessary to make the promise sure, meaning receiving the promise from God and the grace from God, it's dependent on God. So let's receive the promise in his presence, which means we need to get into his presence on a regular basis. Let him call those things that are not into existence. Let him bring life to the dead. Develop a confident expectation that what God said, God will do. Now, this is a process. This doesn't just happen, in a moment's decision, because we have to not consider the circumstances. We can't be worried about that. We can't waver willy-nilly. We can't get into unbelief. We need to strengthen our faith. How do you do that? You give glory to God. You worship him. Worship is key in developing faith. And then we must press in until we are fully convinced that what God has promised, God will do. And of course, finally, we have to let God do it, keep our fingers out of the pie. The word for today is faith. Be in faith today. Receive a promise today. Spend time with him and get some promises today. God bless. Check in tomorrow.